Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this Monday afternoon. Happy Labor Day for all of you guys as well, or for any of you guys that, celebrates Labor Day. But, excuse me. Anyways, it's, given that it's a holiday and also the fact that there is no basketball being played in for the NBA, so there's not really, big news circulating around basketball right now. So I'm going to take this time to do another set of lists. So this list, this time, it's going to be the top players in the NBA period. So I'm taking all of the players that were just on the top. I'm going to take all the players that were on the top 10 players per position, and I'm going to just rally all of them into one big list and picking out the best players of each and every single one of those guards and forwards and centers that were on the previous lists. So I'm just wrapping up every single one of them and just putting them all up in one big list. Then I'm gonna make both the first and the second segment about the top NBA players, because I feel like this list is probably going to drag on a little bit, and I might only get to the top 10. I want to get to the top 25, but I might only get to the top 10 in these two segments, and I'll continue doing this kind of list further down the road in some of the podcasts that I do, so be sure to stay tuned for that if you are interested in who I think the top 25 players of the NBA are. Next, in what would technically be the third segment, I'm going to be talking about some of the big-time free agents, or not really big-time free agents, but most likely free agents going into not this season, but next season, so the season after this one. And then in the fourth segment, I'm going to talk about a tweet from Evan Fournier, which, I thought was just kind of interesting and I thought should bring to some people's attention. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. We also have a special fifth segment that I reveal at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for all of that. And before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody that we love to hear from what you guys have to say during the show, whether it be a hot take, question for the game, something that you've been dying to say. We are all ears, and we're all about keeping the conversation lively and keeping the conversation going. If you really want to make sure that your comment or question gets noticed, then why not just use Super Chat? You can go ahead and hit the $ below the chat box and send in your message. It's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's a great way to support our channel as well. If Super Chat isn't really your thing, then you can always go ahead and use the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment, gsmcpodcast.net, and send in your comment that way. Then either or really helps the show. It doesn't matter which one you do. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the best players in the NBA, shall we? So number one is Jokic. That's no question, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, no debate about it, nope, nada. I'm not even going to bother debating on Jokic being number one, because there is no argument for him being in any other position that isn't number one. So, yeah. I'm going to take that to the bank with me. I'm not going to argue Jokic being number one, because there's no reason why he shouldn't be number one. That's my argument for Jokic. The reason why he's number one is because nobody should be over him. Period. Done. Anyways, the next player on this list who I'm actually going to debate, and the first player on this list who I'm actually going to debate is, if the image will pop up, yeah, there you go. The Greek freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo. He is arguably the league's best two-way player right now. Arguably the best player on offense, and you could also argue that he's the best player on defense. There is not a single position that this man cannot there's not a single position this guy cannot score against. There's not a single position this guy cannot defend against, and there's not a single thing that the league can do to stop it. So why isn't he number one? The only reason why he's not number one, in my opinion, is because, one, he didn't win the MVP. Two, we did not see him in the postseason, and we did not see him make it far enough into the postseason. So those are two reasons. And then the third one, and this one is just a nitpick, he can't shoot. And those three reasons right there are like the only reason why, in my opinion, Giannis isn't the best player in the league right now. Because aside from Nikola Jokic, Giannis has practically everything that you could ask for in a player, period. He has the height, he has the strength, he has the scoring ability, he has the rebounding, he has the defense, he has the IQ, he has everything aside from shooting that you could possibly ask for in a high value, high producing number one option. And even despite the fact that he can't shoot, he can still give you 30 points, which is like, it's the consistency that I want on a team. It's like, sure, it would be even better if he could shoot, but he's already doing ridiculous things without even needing to shoot. So it doesn't really seem like he needs to develop a jumper. So that's just my opinion on it. And another reason why he might not be ranked that much higher than Jokic is because it's been a while since he's won a championship. But aside from that, there's really no reason why he shouldn't be the best player. There's really no reason. And every single year the Bucks are title favorites. They should be title favorites. They should be one of the title favorites going into the season for this year, depending on how Damian Lillard developed over the offseason. But yeah, for the most part, I think Giannis is the best player aside from Jokic, Giannis is the best player in the NBA. And if it weren't for Jokic just being so ridiculously good, I would put Giannis at number one. Because, again, I would much rather have a player that's good at everything as opposed to a player that's good at one side of the ball, which is essentially what Giannis is when you compare him to Jokic, but at the same time, Jokic just does so much with the ball. You cannot not put him at number one, right? That's literally the one thing. You cannot not put him at number one. But Giannis, you can interchange and you can make an argument about that. I can't find an argument for Jokic. But anyways, the next player on this list, and I'm not going to show any of the other players because I don't really feel like I need to. I feel like everybody really knows every single one of those players. The next player on this list is Stephen Curry. And I know all of you are probably incredibly surprised. Why is Steph Curry so high on this list? And you're a LeBron fan. Man, I know it is kind of ridiculous, but I will say that despite the fact that I do think that LeBron was better than Steph Curry in the last season, and I do think LeBron is better than Steph Curry, period, I also have to take into consideration the amount of assistance, for lack of a better term, that Steph Curry has been getting or was getting for the majority of the season. It was roughly around the same as LeBron was getting. I can't even lie. It's roughly around the same, except you could argue that it's worse because, for example, we know Klay Thompson is not the same player that he was. We know he's not the same defender, right? We know that Klay Thompson is not the same defender. But we know that Anthony Davis is still the same player that he is. He is still the same player from New Orleans and still the same Laker that could dominate any given game that he wants, but it's just he doesn't. And it's there's much more consistency from Anthony Davis than the consistency that you'd get from Klay Thompson. And, Steph was still, despite, playing alongside Klay Thompson, an offensive liability, and then Draymond Green, who is also an offensive liability because, he just for the fact that he just doesn't want to score. It's you're essentially putting Curry in a situation where it's it could go really good or it could go really, really bad. And meanwhile, with LeBron, you're putting him in a situation where it could go good or it could go bad. And that key difference right there is, in my opinion, what really separates what separates those two from being ranked higher than the other, in my opinion. Because if let's say the roles were reversed, I would probably put LeBron in there as opposed to Steph. If Steph had a better team, I would put LeBron in there. But because of the fact that Steph did not have that good of a team for the most of the season, and because of the fact that he played really well for last season, I'm putting him at top 3. Now, it might sound a little bit, crazy just because, the other players that I have ranked below him did a little bit more in the previous season. But it should also be noted that this list isn't just directly off of the results from last season. It's off of, overall, my opinions on them and where I would put them, just based off of not just only my opinions on them, but also my, really, I can't really say that, I can't really, give, any sort of, I'm obviously going to try to back up most of my statements, but it's my list and it's my opinion. I can't really, give a factual explanation for something that's my opinion. So, I mean, again, if you guys like it, then that's great. If you guys don't like it, tough, it's my list, and I'm going to justify why I put people where I put them on my list. But, again, you guys don't like it, just let me know in the comments. Next player on this list has to be Luka Doncic, and the only reason why I didn't put Luka or any of the other point guards that I'm going to mention higher is because I don't think there should be any point guard in the NBA that should be given the honor of being called better than Steph. In my opinion. Again, in my opinion. For as much as I don't like Steph, I do respect his game, and I do respect the fact that he is the best shooter in NBA history, and I do respect the fact that teams will literally forget about every other player and would rather guard Steph, which is honestly a thing I forgot to mention. Steph and his gravity is one of the craziest things I've ever seen in basketball. It's the fact that he's able to attract so much attention despite the fact that he's so far away from the basket, and part of that is definitely boosting his rating. So in case any of you guys were questioning and had that question. And so right, we stopped with Luka, and I'll do the next player on the list, but I'll explain Luka and then we'll go into the break. But Luka, essentially, I mean, how could he not be top 5 on this list? He was top 3 in MVP voting. A lot of people might argue that he should have won the MVP. I don't think so, but he was also a ridiculous player alongside with Kyrie. He had a great final stretch of the season, which ended up leading the Dallas Mavericks all the way to the finals, which is what they needed. But, I mean, Luka, just one of the best players in the NBA, so he's got to be up in the top 5. He's that's always a rule that I have. Luka, he has to be in the top 5. You got to put him, if you're going to put him somewhere, you got to put him in the top 5. I refuse to believe that you can name 5 players better than Luka Doncic. And that's really the biggest reason why, I have him. So I have him in the top 4. You can't do that. Now, the next player on this list, so this will be 5th on the list, is going to be LeBron. No question about it. LeBron. I'm not going to even bother debating that. LeBron. The only player that I think, the only player that I see that is genuinely better than LeBron James, solely off of just, the only players that I see that are better than him, just better, are Giannis and Jokic. The only reason why I think that Luka is better than him is because Luka is younger, and the only reason why I think Steph Curry is better, should be ranked higher than him in this season, is because Steph Curry had a much more difficult time in the last season. But LeBron is top tier. He's definitely top 5. I don't care what any of you guys say. Especially after these recent Olympics, you cannot convince me that there are still a whole team full of the NBA's best players, and they all went to the oldest man on the court. You have to have him in the top 5. I am sorry, gotta have him in the top 5. And again, all of you guys can just dislike my list, but it's my list, so deal with it. But anyways, aside from that, we are completely out of time for this first segment. We went way over the time. So now we'll go ahead and continue on with the second segment, which is going to be continuing on with the top players of the NBA. And we'll see how far we can get to before I have to stop again. And I'll be right back after this short break. So be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I apologize for that longer than normal wait. I was having audio problems. I'm having all sorts of problems. I've had internet problems. I've had audio problems. It's just not been my day. But anyways, we're going to continue with the top players of the NBA in this segment. Before I continue, though, I do like to remind everybody that we do love to hear from what you guys have to say during the show or on the show, whether you guys have a hot take or a burning question or anything that you're just dying to share. We are all ears. So if you really want your comment or question to get noticed, then go ahead and use Super Chat. And this show is all about keeping the conversation lively, making sure that your voice is a part of the mix, and if you've got something that you've been dying to share, we're all ears, and if you use Super Chat, it's guaranteed to get featured on the show the next time I go live. So in case you guys want to get mentioned on the show, then go right ahead and drop a Super Chat, or you can go ahead and use the link displayed below the ticker, or the link displayed below the description. Either or, it's the same link, gsmcpodcast.net. If Super Chat isn't really your thing, just another way to donate if any of you guys are interested. But with that out of the way, let's continue on with this list. So we stopped at LeBron, who was ranked number 5 on my list. So then number 6, I'm going to have to say, is going to be Kevin Durant. Because, in my opinion, when you have LeBron, there's going to be Kevin Durant that's going to be mentioned right after. And Kevin Durant, in my eyes, has always been second to LeBron. I know a lot of people, they want to say that at one point when he won the MVP, he was better than LeBron, but no, that's just not true. And a lot of people, they also like to say that when he was on Golden State, I'm just adjusting the camera, he was better than LeBron, and that also wasn't true. But this season, you could argue that Kevin Durant recently has been playing a little bit better than LeBron James. Again, recently, and the only reason why I'm even saying recently is because it's like the only reason why I'm putting huge parentheses on that is because Kevin Durant has mainly been riddled with injuries throughout the past seasons, so he doesn't have to play nearly as many games. And not to mention the fact that, because he doesn't have to play many games, his numbers are usually a little bit more inflated. But then again, LeBron has also dealt with injuries, so don't mean to really take away from that entirely. However, Kevin Durant, he is younger as well, meaning that, of course, he's going to play better. Of course, he's arguably going to play just as good or around just as good because he's younger than LeBron, so it makes sense. And again, the numbers, they aren't that bad. He was averaging 27, 6, and 5, which on a number one and the number one option on Phoenix, which I think deserves some praise. But again, I understand why you probably wouldn't want to rank him nearly this high given his playoff performance. In fact, I was very close to just not even putting him in the top 10 just because of his playoff performance, but I thought that was just, that was a little bit blasphemous. That could have been seen as a little bit not only haterish, but also given what he did in the Olympics, that might be a little bit, how should I say, inconsiderate? Yeah, that's the word. So, yeah. That's the big reason why I'd have him as number 5, number 6 as opposed to number 5, Next player on this list is Joel Embiid. And yes, I mean, as much as I don't like Joel Embiid, I have to put him on this list because he is the second best big man in the entire league. And he did win the MVP last season. The only reason why he's not that much higher on this list is because of injuries. Aside from that, I think being ranked number 7th is a pretty good spot for him. He lost in the first round last year and, again, missed a majority of the season last year. But despite this, he was on an MVP campaign up until he got injured. And because of that, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt for that injury and, still give him the top 10 spot because, let's face it, even though we saw how bad he was in the Olympics and we saw how unproductive he was for the United States, that doesn't take away from what he's done in the NBA and what he's able to do in the NBA. So, it's my opinion on that. Next player on this list is, in my opinion, Devin Booker. And, Devin Booker being really high on this list is probably, really, really surprising to a lot of you guys, especially when you look at, especially when you looked at my previous list and I put Anthony Edwards over, I believe I put Anthony Edwards over Devin Booker. But that was mainly due to the recency bias and not so much as what they've done collectively in the league. This is how this list is a little bit different than the best players going into the NBA. Because this isn't about the best players per position going into the NBA. This is about the best players in the NBA. Not going into, just in the NBA. So it's they didn't do anything to prove that they were this, or that. They just are. If that makes sense to any of you guys. Again, I'm trying to rationalize my opinion for those of you guys that might have differing opinions or might question my own, but this is my list. So it was between Devin Booker or Anthony Edwards on who would take the spot and so high, right? And given what Devin Booker has done for most of his career, I can get by that. I can genuinely, and not only that, he was also he was a dark horse candidate alongside Anthony Edwards as being one of United States' best options for Team USA. While Anthony Edwards was getting all the attention, Devin Booker was also getting buckets. So it's while Anthony Edwards might have beaten Devin Booker in a series, I think Devin Booker's career outweighs the fact that Anthony Edwards beat him in a series, especially with his ridiculous scoring games. He's had crazy scoring games throughout his career, which is another reason why he gets a nod on this list. Also, his finals appearances. I should mention that finals appearance also plays a part in that. So, for any of you guys that are wondering why is Anthony Edwards, lower than Devin Booker, meanwhile he's higher than Devin Booker on a different list, that's the reason why. So, next player on this list is going to be Jimmy Butler. And I know Jimmy Butler didn't really play in the postseason, and I know I have rather mixed Actually, do I want Jimmy Butler there, or do I want to switch the two? No, I'm okay with Jimmy Butler there. Like, I know that I say that Jimmy Butler, like, he's like, I say that he's a myth in the postseason, but the reason why I say that is because a lot of people make his postseason performances seem way better than what they actually are, which is the only reason why I do that. Like, his postseason performances are good, and in most cases they're great. But I will say that a lot of the fan hype around these performances, I feel, are a little bit too much. Whereas if it was somebody else that wasn't Jimmy Butler, they wouldn't get nearly as much attention as they would. Like, let's say, so in one of the series, Jimmy Butler against the Knicks, I believe he was averaging 20 points per game, which was significantly lower than the 30 points per game that he was averaging in the first round, right? However, nobody was bad. Nobody was obviously this didn't happen last season. This happened a couple seasons ago, but nobody was batting an eye in the extreme drop in points production. Nobody talked about that when Jimmy Butler went from averaging 30 to averaging 20. But if LeBron were to do that, well, everybody would just lose their minds. Like, everybody would go haywire at the fact that LeBron just dropped from averaging 30 points per game to 20 points per game. It would be the biggest story of the week, and you would never hear the end of it. But because it was Jimmy Butler, there you go. And that's exactly why things happen. That's exactly why things happen. And then the last player on this list, well, not the last player on this list, but the last player that I have time to mention on this list is Anthony Davis. He takes the final spot in the top 10. And yes, a lot of these reasonings might be influenced by Olympic play, but it's my list, so deal with it. But anyways, Anthony Davis, aside from, the Olympics, he's been proving himself as, he's actually proving a lot of the haters wrong that he can actually play a lengthy amount of games in the regular season, which is something that he would get criticized a lot for doing in previous seasons, and now he's not doing that anymore. So props to him on that. And not to mention, his numbers and his production and what he gives to the team as the second option is a necessity for the Lakers to even have any kind of success. And obviously, I would much rather Anthony Davis be more consistent. In my opinion, Anthony Davis should not be this low on the list. Yes, I said the bottom part of the top 10 is a low part on the list for him, because the reality is Anthony Davis should be in the same conversation as Nikola Jokic and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Joel Embiid shouldn't be in this conversation. It should be Anthony Davis who is in this conversation as the big man, as the best big men in the league. But instead, he has to settle outside of the top 10 in the NBA, which, when you look at it in hindsight, it's it's not that big of a deal, because it's you're going from top 2 big man to top 10 player in the NBA, where it's you'd think the drop-off isn't that bad, but it's still a little bit disappointing, in my opinion. But obviously, we know the value that Anthony Davis brings to the team. He's a two-way. He's arguably one of the best two-way centers that the NBA has that isn't named Victor Wembanyama. Hiccups, excuse me. And his presence around the rim, his efficiency on offense, and his ability to score the ball, he's just a complete power forward. And there were people that were comparing him to Tim Duncan at one point. So take that what you will. But aside from that, this is all the time that I have for the top 25 list. We'll continue with this list in different podcasts for the future. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and go into a break. And then after that, we're going to talk about some free agents. Well, not really free agents, but players that have a high chance of becoming a free agent in the next season. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Okay, there we go. Excuse me. Another audio malfunction right there. And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, I'm going to be talking about flight risks. My bad. Or, for those of you guys who don't understand that term, flight risks, they're essentially like people who are in danger of leaving their team. So it's like flight risks are players who are at the risk of potentially playing for a different team in next season. And we have a lot of free agents coming up for this next free agency class. I mean, we have LeBron, we have Jimmy Butler, there's Brandon Ingram, Jamal Murray, Julius Randle. They're all going to be free agents next season. Who else is going to be a free agent? Some role players. There's Sengun, Kuminga, Jalen Green, I believe, and I'm missing a couple, and Jalen Johnson as well. I believe those are some players that are also on the free agency market, and a lot of them, and there are going to be some players, actually a lot of the players in the free agency market that are almost most definitely going to sign with the same team. Like LeBron is most definitely going to sign with the Lakers now that they drafted his son. And, Jamal Murray, he's obviously going to go back to Denver because, he is a very important piece to that team, and they're not going to get rid of him. They didn't get rid of him when he got that season-ending injury, so they're not going to get rid of him now. And on top of that, there's also, who else did I mention? Oh, and Sengun, he's not going to be a part of, he is going to be a part of the Houston Rockets for next season, where it's like, he's arguably going to be the number one option for Houston. So he's most definitely going to return to Houston. But it's the other players that are a little bit unlikely, and we're not entirely sure on where they're going to land. So I'm just going to give a list of some of the players who, in my opinion, could be at a risk of leaving the team, and whether it be for seeking more money, whether it be because they're unhappy in the situation that they're in, or whether it be because of existential crisis or something. I don't know. Whatever reason it could be, I'm going to lay all of that down. So, first player that I'm going to be talking about is Caris LeVert. Now, he's been one of the better six men of the NBA. He's averaged 14 points, 4 rebounds, and 5 assists in the 2022 season. So, just pointing that out so that way you guys know. And in the ideal world, LeVert and the Cavs would have an interest in a new contract. With the second apron luxury tax concerns, however, coming up for Cleveland in next season, they might not be able to afford him. That second apron luxury tax hits people hard. And a lot of owners are going to be a little bit more hesitant now to wanting to, spend that much money on these types of players. And with Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell both agreeing to max extensions for the Cavs this previous summer, the Cavs, they already have $180 million on payroll for the 2025 and 2026 season, and over $20 million more than the current roster is making. So it's not looking good. Like, that's a big problem for that sounds like a big problem for Cleveland. If they can't get their finances straight, or if somebody can't take a pay cut, then the team, or Karis LeVert might not be around for much longer. Like, he's expiring on a $16.6 million contract, and I don't know how much he would really, they'd be able to sign for. The Cavs, they're projected to be just $26.9 million below the second apron with 9 players on the roster. And a new contract for Okoro is probably going to be $10 million, with roughly $17 million left to sign for extra players. Which begs the question, where does Karis LeVert fit in all that? Not entirely sure. So they might have to give up on him. But that's one of the players. Next player on this list is Dennis Schroeder for the Brooklyn Nets. Now, Dennis Schroeder, he's on a team that's essentially going to be bad on purpose. He's going from being the savior for Germany, his Superman role that he has on Germany, to now being on a team that is going to most likely be winless for a majority of the season. And Schroeder is also on his final year of his contract, where he's making $13 million, and he could have made so much more money than that, but he opted to wait for, I guess, another contract or something, aside from the Lakers, and that ultimately didn't end up panning out nearly as well as he thought. It was really bad. He could have made, around, I want to say maybe in the 40 millions or something like that, and now he's only making, the 13 millions, which is a huge, huge loss. He is most definitely kicking himself after that. I forget the exact details on it. I'll pull them up eventually, but I forget exactly what the details of that were. But he's 30 years old, and he averaged 14 points, 3 rebounds, 6 assists, and shot 41% from 3 in the 29 games from after being traded. So even if Schroeder makes it past the trade deadline, there's little reason to believe that he's a long-term option in Brooklyn. And the Nets are definitely, the Nets would save significant cap space next to the summer if they just decide to let Dennis Schroeder go. And not to mention the expiring contracts from Ben Simmons, Bogdanovich, and Zaire Williams as well to pair up with that as well. So the team is committed to rebuilding as well. So with Dennis Schroeder at the point guard and him most likely being in a win-now mentality, I don't think Brooklyn is the best fit for him. So I think he's going to want to get traded, or not get traded, excuse me. I think he's going to want to sign for a different team and possibly look to sort of benefit that team into winning a title. I think he wants to be a contributor for a title contending team, maybe as a sixth man or something like that. But I don't think Brooklyn is going to be his role. I don't think that's the best role for him. Now, next on the list is Clint. I don't know why I was pausing there for so long, but aside from that, next player on the list, Clint Capella for the Atlanta Hawks. Now, the biggest reason why I think he's probably going to seek another option is because his time with Atlanta has not really worked. He spent a lot of his time on Atlanta. Not a lot of his time, but he spent some time on Atlanta after his time with Houston, right? He made it to the conference finals, but after that, the Hawks have really not been able to get anything going with him. And on top of the fact that the Hawks recently just drafted a center at the number 1 pick, and center, power forward, whatever you want to call them, that's it's questioning exactly what Clint Capella's long-term role for the team here really is. And so I think he's going to look for another option just off of the fact that, they drafted another center in the hopes that he is going to be the better center for the team and maybe even lead the team. So he's also on an expiring $22.3 million contract after averaging 11, 10, and 1.5 blocks per game while shooting 57% from the field last season. So I think he's probably going to be getting a starting job somewhere else, and maybe for a little bit more money. Like, that's my thought process, mainly because I don't think he'd want to spend time trying to, be alongside a center if he's ultimately going to get replaced at a time where he should probably be chasing for rings. Now, again, that's just my opinion, but we can, all of us can agree to disagree on that one, honestly. Now, next player on this list is by far probably like the most likely, arguably the most likely player to not be on the team he was close to number one. He was very close to number one, but I decided not to do that. And it's D'Angelo Russell. Now, obviously, we all know exactly why he's not going to be a Laker after this season. It's because of his horrible, terrible, despicable, criminal performance in the postseason. Like, it was bad. It was atrocious. It was disgusting. It was at the most unexpected time you could possibly ask for. D'Angelo Russell was coming off of a streak where he was dropping 25, 26, 30, 32, 22 in like every single night. He would drop close to those numbers. But once the postseason came around, it all ended right there. All of that was done once the postseason came around. And it didn't, not even a second, and it was done. And it was the exact same story that happened the season before last season, where in 2022, the Lakers got swept by Denver mainly because of D'Angelo Russell's lack of play. And here we go again. The Lakers almost get swept by Denver mainly because of D'Angelo Russell's lack of play. And what makes this recent loss even worse is that the Lakers were in position to win in every single one of the games that they were playing in. It's just they were just one or two plays off of winning the game in the end. And the biggest reason why was because of D'Lo's production. And a lot of Laker fans and a lot of people don't want him on LA anymore. And, coincidentally, I don't think D'Lo wants to be a part of that anymore either. Just going off of his attitude, being on the bench and playing the way that he was playing. So I also think that the only reason why he even picked up his player option is because that no team was really interested in getting him on their team in this season, with the amount of contract on his $18.7 million player option. I don't think teams were willing to pay more for that after the recent postseason struggles. So I think that was the reason why he ultimately decided to pick up his player option, because he wanted to end up, being on a team and making a lot of money while being on the team. So I think that in my opinion is the biggest reason why he even took the player option for the previous season. And let me know in the comments what you guys think of that. Do you guys think that he took the player option because he genuinely wanted to be on LA? Or do you guys think he took the player option because he had no other choice? And, excuse me, the final player on this list, and most likely going to be the player that's not going to be playing for their team next season, is Brandon Ingram. Again, this was really close between D'Angelo Russell and, him, but I ultimately decided to go with Brandon Ingram. And after what seemed like months of trade speculation for Brandon Ingram, it now appears that Brandon Ingram actually is going to stay with New Orleans for this season. But once they get over that luxury tax, I think that's ultimately when they're going to decide to part ways. They're already over that luxury tax line. And they still don't have a starting caliber center on the roster. And they're going to have to move on from somebody. Moving Ingram for one while trimming $1.7 million off the payroll remains the best path forward for the franchise, especially when factoring in future contract trepidations and things like that. So being able to move on from a player like Ingram is probably going to be the best step that the Pelicans can take. And in my opinion, I think they should also move on from McCollum now if the goal is to try and get a starting center that is a competent starting center, I should say, that should be able to pair alongside with Zion equally well. And that's the reason why I think you should also give up CJ for that, is because it's not really easy to find a center that can fit in that kind of system. Like, if you were to find any kind of center that would fit in that, I would imagine it would be like Karl Anthony Towns. In fact, if there was any kind of trade that I think that the Pelicans should probably try to get with, it should be a trade between Minnesota that would send Brandon Ingram over there in exchange for Karl Anthony Towns or whatever kind of pieces they need to grab or they need to get rid of in order to avoid that luxury tax and all NBA rules and things like that. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of that trade. Like, well, that possibility of a trade, because obviously, this is just a spitball that I just came up with out of nowhere, which honestly could work now that I think about it. But at the same time, Minnesota seems to be working pretty well right now, so I don't know if they're really going to be as interested in trying to trade one of their, arguably their top two, not even their top two, arguably their top two best player in franchise history. And they wouldn't want to trade that away. I mean, and that's no exaggeration. Karl Anthony Towns is I believe he's the second leading scorer in entire Timberwolves franchise history. So, and not only that, he's also the best shooting big man in NBA history. So I think, being in the conversation for a top two franchise player ever is in the running. And again, it doesn't really take that much to be a top two player for the Timberwolves. Unfortunate as it is. I'm sorry for you, Timberwolves. Unfortunate as it is. But anyways, we are out of time for this third segment. So now we will go ahead and go into this fourth segment where I bring up a tweet from your one and only Evan Fournier, everyone's favorite Frenchman. Or unless you're a Spurs fan, because, your favorite Frenchman is probably either Victor Wembanyama or Tony Parker, something like that. I don't know. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and go into the fourth segment where I talk about a tweet from Fournier about James Harden being ranked over D. Wade. So for any of you guys interested in that, be sure to tune in right after this short break. I will be right back with you guys.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, I'm going to be talking about Harden or Wade, the debate between these two shooting guards. It's a pretty popular debate, but I wanted to talk about it recently just because Evan Fournier, he recently tweeted something that I thought was rather interesting to think about. And, interesting for you guys to think about when we want to talk about perspectives and things of that nature. And so I might as well, I'm sure we all remember, or we all know who each of these two players are. But in case for those of you guys who don't, I'm going to go ahead and just give a little synopsis. So D. Wade, he was a shooting guard for the Miami Heat. At the time, it was argued that he was one of the best shooting guards, for his time. The debate was between him and Kobe Bryant. And the thing that was really separating him and Kobe Bryant are MVPs. And that's, to this day, is the only thing that's really separating Wade from Kobe in terms of accomplishments in their in their NBA career, right? And D Wade, he retired. He's played for several teams. He played for Miami. He played more popularly for Miami because that was where he won the 3 titles. He also played for Chicago. He played for a little bit in Cleveland before then getting traded to Miami right back after that. And for the majority of D Wade's career, a lot of people remember him for his plays on the Miami Heat, and a lot of nostalgic NBA fans remember him for when he was on the Bulls for a little bit, and how, because the story behind it is that, you know, D Wade is from Chicago, like that's the place where he's from, and being able to play from where he's from is, you know, it's a heartwarming thing, you know. So that's one of the reasons why he's a bit of a fan favorite over there. And then there's James Harden's career, which wasn't really stouted with as many championships as D Wade's, but similar to D Wade's career, he's been, you know, stouted as the best shooting guard for the time. And for his prime, like from 2013, like primarily his time in Houston, there was no debate on whether or not he was the best shooting guard in the NBA. He was by far the best shooting guard in the NBA, and it was no question about it. And it was only up until recently with his literally it was only up until recently where people started questioning on whether or not James Harden is a top shooting guard in the NBA, and whether or not he was even considered a shooting guard in the NBA anymore. Because one of the things that sort of differentiated, I guess you could say, James Harden's progressions to D Wade's progressions in the NBA was that Harden progressed into, like, he started as a shooting guard, a pure shooting guard, but then he progressed into like what seemed to be more of a point guard, like a ball handler and distributing the ball kind of player, not so much just a primary scorer. Whereas D Wade was mainly the team's primary scorer. He would have possessions here and there where he would, you know, isolate and do things with the ball, but nowhere near as much as James Harden would end up doing in the latter part of his career with Houston. And, you know, that also brings up, you know, the question, is Harden a point guard all time? Is Harden a shooting guard all time? But a lot of people consider him a shooting guard, and they consider him all time to be a shooting guard, and they just say that he brings the ball up a lot because that was the offensive system that they ran. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Now, where was I going with this? that's the ultimate question when you're rambling. Where am I going with this? But anyways, that's really like the differences between their game and how they were able to progress. And so because of the fact that James Harden like has been able to do everything for his offenses, like you see him on the court 9 times out of 10 he does everything. A lot of people are quick to, you know, point him as one of the best shooting guards in NBA history. And he's definitely top 5. Like, there's no question about him being in the top 5, in my opinion. Like, you can definitely put him in the top 5 without a problem. And it's really when you put him over Dwayne Wade where everybody has the big problem. And the big reason why a lot of people have that problem with people putting James Harden over D Wade is because of the championship difference between D Wade and James Harden. Like, sure, you can argue that James Harden had the regular season MVP, which is something that Dwayne Wade has never been able to do in his entire career, despite the fact that of how good of a shooting guard he actually is. Like, when you think about it, all of the good shooting guards, aside from him, have an MVP on their resume, but he doesn't have one. And so a lot of people are like questioning, how can you label him as a top 3 shooting guard ever if he doesn't even have an MVP on his resume, right? That's where the argument sort of comes in. And so, like, you know, it's interesting because it's like, where would you put them? And it's all dependent on whether you value postseason accolades over regular season accolades. And me personally, I value the postseason accolades. It's not just the fact that D Wade has a ring. It's the fact that he has multiple, and the fact that he was the best player on one of those championship teams. Like, all of those reasons are the reason why I think he's better than James Harden. And on top of the fact that he has better defense than Harden. But that's not really a difficult thing to master. And that's one of the things that a lot of people point at when they're comparing D. Wade and James Harden in terms of skill on the basketball court. It's the fact that D. Wade played much better defense than James Harden did. And while I do agree with that, that isn't really a justifiable reason for somebody being better than another person, because they tried a little bit harder on defense and they played a little bit better on defense. Because if your offensive game is good enough to be able to pick up for lack of a better term, laziness, I don't really see that as a big of a deal. But other people have different opinions on that. So Evan Fournier, he says that he's one of those people that has James Harden over D. Wade. The list goes MJ, Kobe, pretty standard, and then it goes James Harden, then D. Wade, and then Iverson. Somebody responded to him saying, "You've played both, so you're probably right," which is honestly like the best kind of answer that you can give, because yes, Evan Fournier did play both Harden and D. Wade, so he is probably right. But for the person tweeting this, he would have Wade over Harden, not on offensive qualities, but on an overall level. And Evan Fournier said, "I understand. I think that if Harden doesn't fall on the Golden State Warriors cheat code team for 3 years, he ends up an NBA champion, and then we talk about him differently." Which is very, very interesting how that perspective is put into place when we're talking about James Harden, but we don't bring it up when we talk about LeBron. And that's the perspective that I was talking about from the beginning. But aside from that, I mean, he does make a valid point. I mean, if James Harden didn't run into the Golden State Warriors and their OP Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green lineup, their overpowered lineup, then chances are Harden would advance to the finals, and Harden would probably win a championship and arguably win a finals MVP for the Houston Rockets. Again, this was all a big if on whether or not he would be able to actually do that. I personally don't think he would do that, but I do like the perspective that Evan Fournier brings in this conversation. Just the fact that he feels that if the Golden State Warriors weren't so overpowered back then a lot of people would look at his career a little bit differently, which I really, really like because it helps my LeBron case. But on this, I'll elaborate on the LeBron case a little bit more, but on this case in particular with the James Harden and winning championships, I don't think he would have won championships even if he was playing for, even if Golden State wasn't such an overpowered lineup, which is why I don't agree with Evan Fournier's take. I agree with the fact that, yes, it is a possibility that he was robbed of titles because of Golden State's overpowered lineup. But do I think he would have won those titles? Absolutely not. I don't think James Harden would have won those titles. Why? Mainly because of his postseason performances. And he has postseason meltdowns every single postseason. I am not lying when I say this, and I'm not exaggerating. In every single postseason, you will find at least one stinker game from James Harden, or one really bad game that ultimately determines the outcome of the entire series. It's every single season. You can look at the box scores, you can look at the game log. It's every single season that he does this. And because of that, I wouldn't rank him higher than D. Wade, even because of that reasoning that Evan Fournier gave. However, if we're talking about perspective, then I will gladly use this perspective to argue LeBron being the greatest basketball player of all time. Because Evan Fournier is absolutely right. If Golden State wasn't such an overpowered roster, LeBron would probably sit on more championships right now, and we would see the entire league so much more differently. And the fact that these NBA players agree with the fact that that team was ridiculously overpowered only goes to show that LeBron is the greatest. Period. Done. End of story. No question about it. But aside from the jokes, that's my opinions and why I personally don't think Harden is better than D Wade. But let me know in the comments what you guys think of the overall debate between Harden and D Wade. Who do you think is better? Do you have Harden or do you have D Wade? Let me know in the comments. But aside from that, we are going to go ahead and go into the fifth and the final segment where I continue on with my list of the players who I feel like don't deserve the MVP. So we stopped at 1978, I believe. So now we're moving down and farther from the timeline now. So I'll be right back after this short break, and be sure to stay tuned. And we are back to the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fifth and final segment, I'm going to be talking about a player who I feel like didn't deserve an MVP in a specific year, as well as acknowledging one of our viewers in the comments, user 2033, who said, definitely Wade, to the question that I asked before when I asked, who would you rather have as a shooting guard? Do you think D Wade is better all time, or do you think James Harden is better all time? And he said Wade, and I 100% agree with him. But what do you think of the perspective that Evan Fournier used? The fact that if the Warriors team wasn't such an overpowered team, that Harden might have been able to win a couple of championships, and we probably would have seen his reputation and his career would have been different. What do you think about that? But aside from that, we're going to go ahead and go into this 1976 season, because that is the year where I think Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did not deserve to win the MVP. Yes, the greatest basketball, not really the greatest, I can't say anymore, but the second greatest scorer in NBA history. Excuse me. I'm so used to calling Kareem like the best scorer in NBA history, because that was an award that's been held since I was born, up until LeBron James said bye. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But aside from that, yeah, that's the only reason why I was going to say, the best scorer. But, he's the second best scorer in NBA history, and arguably has one of the most unstoppable moves in the history of basketball, the most iconic move in the history of basketball, maybe one of the most iconic players in the history of basketball that you could think of. I honestly think if, aside from Michael Jordan, if there was any player that everyone would be able to name, I think it would be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I don't know why, aside from Michael Jordan, because a lot of people, LeBron is easy. Yes, I understand, everyone can name LeBron. That's easy. But, if I'm talking, somebody who's out of touch in the NBA, but somewhat still follows the NBA, excuse me, and if they were to name you an all-time player, I think 90% of people would use Kareem. And also, if Jordan didn't exist, I think Kareem would be the greatest basketball player of all time, aside from LeBron James. But then again, if Michael Jordan didn't exist, we probably wouldn't have LeBron James. But that's a completely different question for a completely different time. But yes, in 1978, obviously, Kareem, not 78, in 1976, Kareem has a lot of MVPs. It's very difficult to remember exactly which years he won all of them in. But the big story for the 76 MVP, in my opinion, was team record. And I understand, a lot of people, when they talk about the MVP, it's very, how should I say? The opinion is a little bit split. Because on one end, you have to give it to the most valuable player, meaning the player that brings in the most value. But chances are the player that brings in the most value might not be the best player in the NBA. Right? You guys are with me so far. So when we're talking about MVPs, as opposed to talking about best player in the NBA, I feel like team success should be brought up a little bit more when you're talking about most valuable players, more so than it should be brought up when you're talking about best overall players. Because how do you measure value? You measure value by winning. If you're putting up great numbers and you're winning because of those great numbers. If you're putting up great numbers because you're losing, well, something is wrong with what you're doing, or your numbers just aren't great enough. It's one of those two options. So rather than, going over the latter part of the equation where you focus on one or two of those options where it's okay, is he just putting up garbage time stats, or is he just not putting up enough stats, to a question where it's okay, is his team winning with the stats that he's producing, or is his team losing with the stats that he's producing? It makes the debate for the MVP a little bit easier, right? Because if we want to break down pound for pound, stat for stat, exactly who the best player in the NBA is, we would be here forever doing nothing but math, and that is boring. But aside from the comedy, no one wants to do that. Nobody would want to do that. So to make things a little bit easier on yourself, you include the record, you include just overall production, right? Because if you're producing and your team is winning, you're winning because you are producing, plain and simple. It just simplifies things super easily. So when we're talking about MVPs, in this particular season, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he put up 28, 17, 5, and 4 blocks for the season, which is ridiculous. Those are by far MVP numbers. 28, 17, 5, and 4. Those are crazy MVP numbers. But the Lakers for that season, they had a losing record and they missed the playoffs. And I'm sorry, but I cannot, in good conscience and in good train of thought and with logic, give the most valuable player to a player who didn't take his team to the playoffs. I can't do that. It doesn't make any sense to me. How can you give somebody the most valuable player award if they weren't even able to bring any sort of value to your team? You missed the postseason. Now, if they made the postseason, maybe there'd be a better argument for that, but missing the postseason entirely, excuse me, it's just not a good look in MVP conversations. In fact, Russell Westbrook actually faced this stipulation once when he won the MVP in 2017. A lot of people were arguing okay, well, Russell Westbrook's team is the 6th seed or the 7th seed at the time, and actually it was the 6th seed, and James Harden's team was the 3rd seed, so James Harden should have been the MVP because of the... Actually, no. Actually, wait, no. Houston was second that year, I believe. It's difficult to remember these years, but yeah, I remember that OKC was I'm cheering up for some reason. I don't know why. OKC was 6th or 7th, I remember, in 2017, the year that Russ won his MVP. And the Houston Rockets were either 2nd or 3rd, whichever seed coincides with OKC, because they played in the first round. And the biggest reason as to why a lot of people thought that James Harden deserved the MVP was, apart from the fact that he got snubbed a couple of years, because of the fact that James Harden was leading his team to a lot of wins. Meanwhile, Russ was leading his team to mediocre wins and, roughly around the same wins as losses. And it viewed his stats, a lot of people viewed his stats as, a little bit of stat padding, because if you're not leading your team to wins, but you're putting up all these ridiculous stats, what are you doing? Right? But that's a whole other conversation. But I can't give the MVP to somebody who just didn't make the playoffs. You don't bring any value to your team just by producing empty numbers, in my opinion. I would have rather given it to Bob McAdoo, whose team made the playoffs, and who averaged 31, 12, and 4 for the entire season. And that's really the only reason why I think Bob McAdoo should win the MVP over Kareem in this particular year, mainly because his team made the playoffs and Kareem's team did not. Which is, that's essentially the only reason why Kareem didn't win, shouldn't have won the MVP this season, is because his team wasn't the best team in the NBA. Which, I know, it sounds a little dumb, but that's how the MVP works for me. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. But aside from that, hiccups are killing me today. But aside from that, we are out of time for this final segment. That is the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, we'd love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you have a hot take or a burning question or something that you've been dying to get off your chest. We are all ears, and if you really want to make sure that your comment or question gets noticed, go ahead and use Super Chat. Hit the $ below the chat box, send in your message. It's guaranteed to get featured on the show. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, there is another way that you can donate and get your comments recognized by using the link in the displayed below the description, as well as in the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. You could use that link, and that would, if Super Chat isn't really your thing, that also supports the channel. And, it helps me hear from all of you guys a little bit better than what I'm able to do now. So, you guys have Super Chats, then go right ahead and send them. But, aside from that, that is all that I have for you today on the podcast. Thank you once again for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that